It's 7:07. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation, and we're getting into Wednesday morning proper. It is hump day, and we're getting over that hump very well with you today. Our live streams are up on Facebook, on YouTube, and on X, and we're also with our audience on KTN. Everybody is in the house today, and we're getting into a conversation this morning that I think is necessary for us to have. There are very few conversations today that are unnecessary, and one thing that we always say about conversations or discourse that is ongoing is that one of two things will happen: that people continue to talk about those issues and keep them front and center, or as a result of those conversations, something is actually done. So imagine that. And while you're imagine that you have a trusted ally by your side always. That's the I&M Bank promise. We empower you with the tools and support to turn your aspirations into reality. So whether it's a new business that you're venturing into, or getting into your child's education, or even securing your future, I&M Bank is here for you. From flexible financial solutions to personalized guidance, we are on your side, championing your progress and celebrating your successes. So don't just bank, build your future with a partner who believes in you. You can experience the power of on your side banking. Find out more at any I&M Bank branch close to you. And always remember that I&M Bank is on your side. And even as we get into stuff that we talk about this morning, our guest for the hour is already seated. He's been in the hot seat before, but today in capacity to speak about certain issues which we deem necessary. And that is in the person of Joshua Odhiambo Nyamori, who's a governance and policy expert. We're looking at disillusioned opposition. We talked about this earlier, and we're saying, so what role does the opposition actually hold? Joshua, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm most privileged to join you this morning.
Well, we're glad that we're here,
and,
that you're here.
I must say I'm most also privileged, apart from you, that I was happy to come and meet, to today share a table with Fanya Mambo. I mean, I listened to him.
Yes.
In all media.
Yeah.
And I'm impressed.
What we did is that he's been giving he's shared a lot of his thoughts across, and it has really picked up. So what we did this morning is that we decided to pull him out of bed at 4 a.m. and say, let's have this conversation over 4 hours and let's see what we can do. And he graciously agreed to do that. So it's good to have him here as well, to have this discourse with you. So even as we get into a conversation around the opposition, I want to share today's proverb with you. We'll tell you where we are coming in from. One of the Lusophone countries, there are only 3 on the African continent, Lusophone being those countries that speak Portuguese. That Portuguese is one of the official languages. And this particular country is Mozambique, right? So today, the Mozambicans say, if the leech that does not let go, even when it is filled, dies on dry land. The leech that does not let go, even when it is filled, dies on dry land.
You know, I grew up in Kano Plains. And you know, Kano Plains is a land of floods. And we grow rice. So in the rice plantations, leeches are things that we have to deal with every day. And when leeches will attack you in water, but they will, suck your blood. But a leech that is wise enough should be able to pull itself out of your body before you get to dry land. Because when you get to dry land, and what we do is you slap it, and it will die.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Mozambique, is a revolutionary country. If you know the history, a number of African revolutionaries trained in the front line of the Frelimo, and he's changed. But then General Museveni, the scholar, did his master's in political science at the University of Dar, but he spent 2 years in the front line of Frelimo doing his research. So his research is called revolutionary violence. And so when they talk of that, one of the aspects of that research by Museveni is that a revolutionary must change according to times. In the context of our discussion today, I'm thinking that the opposition in Kenya, if I take that example, is like a leech that has, fed on its, grounding that it is an opposition and therefore can speak on anything, outlived the grounds upon which it used to speak, and with the time not changed as Kenya is changing, and is becoming irrelevant and will most likely die unless they transform.
Wow. How is that for an interpretation of a proverb that we can link directly to a current day affair, and also tie into the conversation that we'll be having this morning? I think that was great, Joshua.
I already like his depth.
Yeah, already.
I already like the fact that he's telling us he grew up. The leeches are not very many to some of us who grew up in Mount Kenya. Yeah. So for them, where there's a lot of water, it's a very common thing. So he brought perspective to it, and it's a beautiful place to be.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. Okay. And so we can jump into it this morning, can't we? Where we're asking ourselves the role that an opposition plays in any government. And although we are going to deduce then what will or is happening from that in Kenya, that an opposition plays a vital role in any government, and that more or less its role is to keep the government in check. It is not just about political slander. It is not just about saying that just because we are on the side of the opposition and you are in government, or that I'm in government and you're in the opposition, doesn't now open up the grounds for any kind of political onslaught of insults. But really what it is supposed to do is ensure that things as they go, it plays an almost unofficial oversight role. That's what we think. Is that the role that an opposition should be playing in any government before we get to what has happened in Kenya over the years?
Yeah, opposition has several roles. It's not only that. One, as I agree with you, that one of the opposition's role is to check on the government, to offer oversight, to speak, the uncomfortable truths that people in power might not want to hear. However, it is also important to understand that in the context of Kenya, where we have minority and majority party, with the roles specified in the constitution and the various laws, the opposition has a role in governance, in actual governance, in influencing governance, rather than just making noise. They have a role to, use their numbers, however few or many they are, in the committees, to influence, to bring in, to draft bills, to be able to, invite government ministers and ask questions, to be able to then debate and influence agenda. To be able to bring in new issues, to be able to be a representative of an alternative thought process.
Right.
So that even if the government is a majoritarian government, we should be able to have a discussion on the alternative thought process by the opposition. What we have in the country, if you allow me to go to that, is, however, an opposition that is just opposing, just making noise, never bringing in new thoughts, never creating an agenda. And not representing that alternative thought that is not represented in government. And because of that, we then end up in a situation in which we do not have clashing thought process. And when you don't have clashing thought process, then you are not able to synthesize the various thoughts within the nation and come up with superior thoughts and views and policies. Yeah, I think it is Michael Wamalwa who once said that when there is a good idea, must give space to a better idea. And a better idea should be able to give a seed ground to a grand idea. When he was talking about the Grand Coalition, was it the National Grand Coalition?
Yes.
Movement in 2002. So we are lacking that in Kenya, and for me, it's a failure by the opposition.
When you
And
talk
I hope
about
they can live
okay,
with it.
so
Yeah.
when you talk about creating agenda, I think that is interesting because usually one of the other descriptions that you gave is just making noise, and that what we have seen is that the noise making, albeit useful, I think at some point, does not then give birth to this creation of an agenda. But if there is the creation of an agenda, Joshua, who would implement this agenda? You don't expect that an opposition would create an agenda and that the government of the day would take that on. Or do you?
You know, we have a very interesting constitutional framework, very unique in itself. And this is a constitutional framework that not only allows the winning party to implement its agenda, but ensures that the agenda must go through public participation. So a well-grounded opposition should take time to research and then take time to try and influence thought process within parliament, but also try to influence thought process and share their views outside to the public so that they mobilize public support towards what they're doing. And in my view, it really does not matter what the government wants. If the public participation is carried out properly and it is inclusive, it is valid in terms of quality and quantity, and it makes sense, then the opposition can still use that to be able to push the government to adopt what they want. The other thing is that opposition should not necessarily just make noise. Opposition should also sometimes try to influence government. And they have this opportunity where in the committees, they can actually engage not as opposition and government, but as parliamentarians. And as parliamentarians, at that point, they have an opportunity to present motions and they have opportunity to present views that they should be able to engage in and then influence their brothers and sisters the other side. Yeah.
So let's do, sometimes it's, you see the reality of something when you can be given examples and then you can say, okay, this has actually worked. This thing that we prescribe and say you must have a vibrant opposition, which is keeping government in check, which is creating an agenda beyond just the making of noise that is good. How have we seen the opposition operate in Kenya? Say, let's go from 2002, where Kijana Wamalwa was saying the things that you're talking about here before the formation of a coalition.
And maybe.
And what do we see that has resulted, that has come about as the result of a vibrant opposition that has moved or changed anything?
And maybe you could tie that with the question of, we know one Opiyo Wandayi was supposed to have been the leader of minority in parliament. Technically, he was supposed to have been the leader of opposition in parliament. He's now a minister in this government. Then can we say we have an opposition in this country? Can we say we have an opposition? Because you see, Opiyo Wandayi was supposed to have led the opposition in oversighting government. Like ministers or public or the CSS should have come to him and the committees that they form to answer questions. But now he's sitting as a cabinet secretary. Is it plausible to say that we still have an opposition in this country?
Yeah, let me start with your question and then I come to yours. And my view is that we have had, very vibrant opposition. Even in the height of the one-party dictatorship. You remember we had the 7 bearded sisters who are just very few individuals, but they kept the government to check. And how did they do it? They did it through research. They did it through, engaging on issues. They did it through mobilizing beyond parliament and mobilizing the civil society. They did it by avoiding divisive identity of ethnicity. and regionalism that now informs our opposition. Then we look at after Malipati, what we had in this country under Jaramogi initially and other leaders. It was a more vibrant opposition than we have today. And partly it's because I think we took in better leaders who were able to engage not only as politicians and ethnic lords, but also as professionals who had credible backgrounds. That is lacking majorly in our parliament and especially in the opposition. Then, Mambo, you raised the issue of Opiyo Wandayi moving into government from the opposition. I think my what I normally tell people, I never engage on what should. I engage on what is. And the reality of Kenya is, if you look at, the evolution of Kenya politics, is that we are moving towards post-election arrangements. Some people call it coalitions, some people call it broad-based, some people call it handshake, but in which the government that is in power, because rarely would we have a government that has significant, majority in parliament. But the government in power would always want to have a comfortable majority to allow it to then pass its bills and its programs and to be able to, finance its programs through finance bills and others. And so the government will always look for ways and means of working with either the whole or part of the opposition. And this is not unique to Kenya only. I mean, the South African ANC, when they realized that they were going to have a hung parliament, made the deals with their traditional opponents, the DA, who, no one ever imagined that the DA would work with South Africa. Germany is an example where governments always reach out to the opposition to form, a post-election arrangement. It happens also to Israel. And so the opposition should, those who remain and decide to remain in the opposition, should, accept the fact that these arrangements will always arise. And when they arise, it is important that Opiyo Wandayi should not be an individual. There should be other people who can step, forward, take up that position. And I believe that it is not necessary in terms of numbers, in terms of what are the issues they bring. How can they mobilize the country around those issues? How, eloquently and deeply do they debate those issues when they're given an opportunity on the floor of the House, rather than talking about their ethnicity and other narrow backgrounds.
But I'm sorry.
That's my view.
And I think our position is to tell things and discuss things that we see, right? Yes. It is not wanting to be on the right side of whatever, but it is reporting and talking about what we see. Yeah. But what do we see? That when we saw that there was a marriage of government and opposition, we cannot run away from that reality. It is beyond perception or optics. It is the reality that happened, and that what we get from that marriage is that a baby has been birthed whereby anything can go, and that all this particular baby is making sure that the needs and wants of individuals and groups then are met. The examples that you gave of Israel and Germany, when opposition came together with government, it was for the proliferation of an agenda that would see those countries thrive and succeed and continue to develop. Can we say that we've seen the same thing happening in Kenya when opposition and government get into bed together? Can we say that?
And maybe, I think, look at it this way. And I have always asked myself, if the administration wanted a bill, for example, to increase the salaries of MPs, do you think a marriage would have been necessary? Probably that bill would have passed through Parliament very quickly and very fast. I think, will there ever be a likelihood of a situation where all the bills that are coming to Parliament are so pro-Kenyan that any person sitting anywhere, whether they're in a marriage with government, would like to pass those bills?
Exactly.
There are different perceptions, definitely, on what the role of the broad-based government is, and then what they are doing. Okay, my view is that we need to accept the reality that we have a broad-based government, the political leadership of ODM and UDA, in terms of the president and his brother Raila Amolo Odinga decided to join together, and then for whatever reason, but then they then put down what they wanted to do in terms of the 10 points agenda. My view is that those 10 points agenda should be the basis upon which anybody who wants to engage this government should continue to engage the government on the floor of the House and outside the House.
Before you go to the next perception, Joshua,
yes,
I'm sorry,
yes.
but on that particular note, and that's the thing that I'm saying here, is that can we actually see that the fruits of that marriage are for Kenya? Are they for Kenya, or are they for the individuals who are in this small committee of people, which, if you look at it, is not more than 200 people that are in this thing together? Is it for Kenya?
Again, perception. Again, perception. But then I would want to invite you to look at the Kenya we had in 2002, 2003, when we had Kenyans in the streets, and one of the noise that was being made is that this government is not inclusive, while at least on the other side we had the deputy president who was always talking about shares and telling people that you are not going to give government services because you did not vote for this government. And then you have a situation now when you have the PS for, I think, labor services or something, this young man from Malindi, and you have the PS from Turukana, and you have my friend Atandi from Alego also being part of this government. It makes the government more inclusive. Okay, it gives a face of Kenya. It makes their supporters and the people, where areas they come from, and not only in terms of the region, but also in terms of religion, in terms of age. It makes the government as inclusive as possible. So that's an alternative thought, and those are the things that people should then be able to gauge. So what I was coming to before then you asked the question is that for all these issues that the government has then promised to engage in, I would expect the opposition to have an alternative thought. They should identify where they agree with government and where they disagree with government, and actually give us their own manifesto, give us their own program, tell us that an opposition should be a futuristic body. It should be a body that is telling us that if you were to remove this government today, then we would put in place this kind of government, and give us their shadow cabinet secretaries, and let those shadow cabinet secretaries come to parliament every week and talk about an alternative to everything that the government is talking to. Right, the country is now getting deeper into discussing the finance bill 2025, and the government has said that this finance bill is not aimed at increasing tax, but it is meant to enhance efficiency and ensure that everybody does their role in terms of tax paying. The question is, what is the alternative thought that the opposition have? As we are going out to public participation, do we have what the government has told us and how the opposition discount it, and what then they think that we should do, so that the public have full disclosure, the public are informed, and the public are able to make decisions between alternatives? Because the man in the street, the man in the village, does not have the complexity and the depth to be able to do thorough analysis, to be able to then engage deeply with the policy documents without being given alternatives, and then give credible views during public participation. That's the role of
allow me to ask you. You've spoken very eloquently and very nicely about inclusivity.
Yes.
Has this government ever thought of inclusivity from any other perspective other than regions? Because one of the things that it appears to some of us is that inclusivity has not been thought about in terms of common sense. Has this government ever thought that common sense is one of the ingredients of inclusivity?
That you must include.
So that people who have a lot of common sense in this country would be included. For example, may he rest in peace, the late John Michuki is remembered for seatbelts. He's remembered for the yellow line. He's remembered for reforming the matatu sector. Matiang'i, hate him or love him, he turned all our school buses into yellow. At least when you see a yellow bus, even when you're driving, you ask yourself, wait, there are angels in this bus. In fact, for me, every time I see a yellow bus when I'm driving, I'm tempted. I just feel that I want to give way, because I can tell there are 20 young people in that bus who need to go home, and they are more than myself, and they are relying on that driver to get them home. I can go home at midnight. Nobody will ask me questions. So what we are trying to say, this inclusivity has been looked as a regional thing. You have a guy from Malindi, a guy from Turkana, but I haven't seen inclusivity in terms of the government making a deliberate effort to look for common sense and to bring people who would literally bring change. Because what country is looking for is not for us to keep giving you alternative views. I think what Kenyans are saying, why don't you give people who are so brilliant that they are coming with wow ideas, like, the school bus idea, the Michuki rules, and so on and so forth. Why hasn't government thought it necessary to look at common sense or brilliance as part of inclusivity and just bring us ministers who will wow this country, PSs who will wow
and actually
this
get it done?
Yeah.
I like the way you are dealing with it. But then the question I will ask you, do we need common sense or do we need rare sense? I'm asking this question because common sense in its basic definition is what is common, what any other person could do.
The reason I use that word was deliberate as you answer. The reason I use that was deliberate as you answer is, for example, in the month of May, and it has not occurred to some people in the Ministry of Education that there are children who are waiting for exams in November, and therefore they have not allocated budget for exams. I mean, since independence is the first time we are seeing that. Now, that is why I'm using the word common sense, that it is not so common to some human beings that children who are sitting exams in November would have needed to have the exams prepared for in May. They are saying they don't have a budget for invigilation. We are not even sure whether the children are going to sit for the exam. That's why I use the word common sense deliberately.
Yeah, let me then, I'll get to that. My point is, when you look, I am a student of human rights. In fact, this morning I'm reading for an exam that I'm doing later in the day, and what I was reading on was on disability rights law. And you will agree with me that on disability rights law, the issue that we talk about is inclusivity. How inclusive is our systems and so on and so forth. But my point is, when you say that again, I think it is perception. When you say that this government is not inclusive and that does not have common sense and that does not give priority to common sense, as you call it, when choosing people.
I just asked whether they do.
What do you say of the choice of Professor Makau Mutua to actually advise the president on matters of human rights?
You must ask the question whether he was actually brought in to do that.
You see, the unfortunate thing is that you cannot. You must give credit where it's due. For those of us who are scholars of human rights, Professor Makau Mutua is one of the most respected scholars on human rights worldwide. And when you look at documentation, especially on the African instruments of human rights, is a respected scholar.
Yeah.
He comes not from the president's party. He comes from a party that has criticized the president over the years, and he has criticized previous government. He has been out there. He has written papers. He's contributed to journals. He has been given a chance to advise not a minister, not a PS, but to advise the president. Shouldn't we celebrate that? And then those of us who are activists on matters of human rights, then not only use Professor Makau Mutua to push our agenda, but also hold him to account and hold the president to account as times move by in terms of whether the president is utilizing the thought process by Professor Makau Mutua or not.
I want us to take a break on this point. Just hold on to that, because we then have to look at the underlying issues here. These appointments that we see, was it done because he really wanted to pull in on his human rights acumen and his human rights history? Or are we seeing yet another position that was given to soothe temperatures and to make sure that you have everybody who would previously make noise now on the low once you've given them a position? We must look at both sides and ask that question, that did this happen because his historical education and his experience wanted to be employed in government, or were we looking to give a cushy position so that person would keep quiet? And as often happens with opposition in many, many countries, Kenya being one of them. These are the questions we're asking this morning. At 23 minutes to 8 o'clock, we'll take a break. Joshua Odhiambo Nyamori is a governance and policy expert. He's our guest this hour. It continues after this. 20 minutes to 8 o'clock, Joshua Odhiambo Nyamori is our guest this hour. And we're looking into the opposition, its role. And are we looking at a disillusioned opposition, Fanya Mambo?
Actually, I just wanted to throw in a question to him, just based on what he had just said about Professor Makau Mutua. And the questions that very many Kenyans are asking me, and they're even chatting me here, they are saying, please explain to us why we have a president who needs a professor to tell him, because on human rights, that abductions are wrong. You don't need a university professor who has been lecturing in the US on human rights for all those years to just come and tell you that when you arrest a Kenyan, take them through the court process, let them be heard. You don't need a university professor, because when you find yourselves hiring a professor to help you deal with human rights issues, it means you have a bad human rights record, because people look for what they don't have. Yeah, and so I think then Kenya has an attorney general. Then are we saying then that the Attorney General is legally incompetent to advise the president? I think these are questions that Kenyans would want to answer, because there's duplicity. It's Kenyans' money. We have learned that Kenya is spending 1 billion shillings every year on 50 advisors. And now they've added Professor Makau Mutua. And some of these advisors are advising the president on things that we already have civil servants doing. Because when you have an advisor advising the president on human rights and the respect for the rule of law, and then we have an attorney general and they're both earning from Kenyans, then Kenyans have to raise questions, because this money is coming from their pockets. Why do we need someone to advise the president on how not to abduct Kenyans, for example?
You know, I came in to discuss the opposition. I've realized that the discussion is shifting to discuss the president. However,
these individuals
which are very important, which are very important. We must continue discussing that. But then I would let me first take her question. And my point when you talked about whether the president is genuine in inviting people like Makau Mutua and the opposition to work with him, and whether he really is genuine in seeking to resolve Kenyan problems. And then I would want to tie it with what you have talked about, whether he needs Makau Mutua. Okay? Yes. My point is this. Before studying law, I studied economics, and one of the thought leaders that we studied in economics was Adam Smith, and one of his greatest works was The Wealth of Nations. And in The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith says that it is not in the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we can expect our dinner from their regard to their own interest. That we can expect our dinner, but it is with regard to their own interests. So, political class, professionals come on board because of partly their own sake, and whoever is in the seat of the presidency, one of the most important objectives that they have is to sustain their stay in the presidency and probably get re-elected. So anybody would have that objective, and so the question is, when then he brings in the opposition to work with him, is it simply a bad thing? Because when the opposition come in, then they bolster his ability to be in government. It's not a bad thing. Everybody would want to be in government, and this happens across the world. The question is, do the individuals who are initially not agreeable with him have an opportunity to influence thought process? Okay, and with this, I would then move to your question on why you need a professor. You know, you cannot have your cake and eat it, Fanya Mambo. You cannot accuse us, you cannot accuse the leadership and others of not using common sense. And then when they look for the best of brains to work with them, then you say that is bad. You don't need to get those best of brains to inform you. Our constitutional architecture and our governance structures, entrenches human rights. When you look at the Bill of Rights, it forms almost, I think, a quarter or more of the volume of our constitution. And it informs the values on human rights, informs the entire constitutional architecture that we have. And so everything in this government should be looked at and studied and evaluated and designed from a human rights approach. And so the Attorney General is, yes, the chief legal officer to the government. It does not necessarily mean that the Attorney General must be an expert in human rights. It goes beyond just studying law. The other thing is that at the level of the presidency is not just an individual. And that individual who heads the presidency is entitled to and needs credible advice. And so when we have somebody like Professor Makau Mutua sitting at that high level and being able to influence what the president says, then that is important. One of the things that, for me, I think is important, even though a number of people then criticized and made fun of it, was the president coming out in public and saying that, there have been abductions. It will not happen again. Okay? The first thing in resolving our dirty human rights past is to acknowledge that is a problem. Once you have acknowledged that is a problem, then design how to resolve it.
Okay.
So the other thing I want to say that it is not President William Ruto who has brought in opposition. It started in the 17th century. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, one of the things that he only ruled for 4 years before he was assassinated. One of the things that he's remembered for is that when the USA was going through a crisis, he reached out to his greatest rivals and formed the team of rivals. Brought in Seward, brought in Bates, and the other one I think was called Chase. To form part of his government.
To what end? I'm sorry, I'm going to hold you on that. To what end?
Abraham Lincoln was facing a crisis.
Yes.
So one of his objectives probably was to survive and to help him prosecute his agenda, especially during the Civil War.
No, I'm sorry. I have to insist.
Yes.
What was the crisis? I know it. What was the crisis faced by Abraham Lincoln at the time that he sought a solution to that made him bring in gentlemen like Seward to then make sure that it was... What was the crisis? What was the problem?
I mean, the America was divided.
Okay.
And
what was happening as a result of that division?
America was in war. Okay. America needed to have a broad-based approach, a united front, so that the country could be united not only in terms of numbers but also in terms of the thought process.
Okay.
And it worked in saving the Union. It served in ensuring that Abraham Lincoln, when you read about the history of that period, one of the things that Abraham Lincoln considered in is that some of the greatest ideas that then informed his policy during that period were things that he received, not necessarily from the people who were said to be his people, but the people that he received, the thought process and advice that he received from his rivals.
Exactly.
Yes.
Now, if you want to take that and you want to apply it to the Kenyan situation, we are dealing with apples and oranges, two totally different things. And this is what I'm saying today. When the broad-based government, which was the invitation to essentially generals who were in the opposition, what was the crisis that they were trying to solve when they came together? What was the crisis?
You remember that the broad-based government was formed after the protest on the budget.
So what were they trying to solve?
One of the issues, I want to answer it through an example. And one of the issues was that taxes. Kenyans were protesting against increased taxation. The current cabinet secretary for Treasury has come out and told the public that the proposals that are taken in Parliament is, unlike before, not increasing taxation. They are maintaining taxation at what they are, simply making the process more efficient and ensuring that everybody plays their part so that not a few are overburdened by the process. That could be. That could be an influence that has come from the opposition.
Was it necessary that John Mbadi is the only individual who would have come in with the suggestion, because he was in the opposition and now brought in as a cabinet secretary, is the one who would have made a suggestion to lower taxes, and then therefore we can see justification for inclusion of the opposition? Mind you, when Abraham Lincoln brought in these gentlemen to solve the issue of crisis that was going on in the United States, it did not merge opposition sides. It brought in people who were going to advise unto an end. And that is my question today. That can we see as a result of this, because what we have is a full-on merging. We don't have advisors who are sitting in one place and then that the opposition still remains. There is no opposition.
I think, allow me, there's something that nobody has wanted to address. And this is where the Kenyan problem is. After the Gen Z demonstration, William Ruto reached out to Raila Amolo Odinga so that they can form what they called the broad-based government, which Kenyans like to call bread-based or blood-based government. And the reason they call it that is because when the Raila Amolo Odinga side joined this administration, Kenyans did not see their issue on the table
being addressed.
What they saw is, you see, William Ruto, what he was supposed to have done, the crisis was not that Kenya is not united. And by the bringing Raila Amolo Odinga and the others was not going to unite the nation. The thing that was going to unite the nation was an end to corruption, an end to wanton waste of public resources, and so many other things. What William Ruto did, it appears to Kenyans, was to bring in experts who would help him to continue with the hemorrhage of public resources. I mean, under this bread-based government, we've seen there were no 4 billion for sure. We've seen 15 billion being lost on e-citizen like it's nothing goes on. We've seen a lot of bad things. We've been told 8 billion has been lost from the Hustler Fund and it's okay. We've been told that there's money that is not going through the exchequer and it's okay. And so what Kenyans are saying is that what William Ruto did is he brought the opposition to help him to continue looting the country. The opposition did not come in to do a Kenyan agenda. So that is the problem. What we wanted was not, as Kenyans, what we did not want was not to see them together. What is the uniting factor is that Kenyans wanted to see better governance. And that has not happened. So it's not about bringing people from different tribes and saying now Kenya is united. No. Kenya would have been united behind an idea. And the idea was meritocracy. Has that happened?
I respect your views as the media, especially to problematize and in problematizing the issues, then give different perspectives. But I think as we do that, we need to give credit where it's due. And when I talk about credit where it's due, I am expecting you not only to say that there is nothing, but I'm expecting you to engage on the 10 points agenda. Did they agree on this agenda? Are these agenda things that are important? Is an issue of national unity and cohesion important in this country?
Absolutely.
Is the issue of economic stabilization and growth
1,000%.
as is now being codified in Finance Bill 2025 is important? Is the issue of social justice and inclusion to see this young man from Malindi or from Malindi And to see the lady from Turkana and to see a Muslim and a Christian and to see the various ages part of the government, is that important? Is the issue of the electoral reforms that was codified in the NADCO and then in the IBC Amendment Act 2024 that has then informed the process of selecting our proposed commissioners, was this important?
Yeah, let me ask a question?
Yes.
I can answer that question. It is absolutely important.
Yeah.
My question is, and I'm still going to go back to the Abraham Lincoln example that I think it was a brilliant example, because by the time he was assassinated, right, this agenda of uniting the United States had actually happened. It had happened because of what he did. I'll use the example that you've given about IEBC and ask a question. Today, what has happened? The High Court, as of Monday, halted the further on vetting and the nomination and placement of these IEBC individuals. Remember, it is on the 10 points, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, one would have assumed that because you saw a marriage and collapse of these two and brought them together as one, that some of these 10 points, then we would start to see them working out. But what have we been told? That there's a question mark about even some of the people who've been nominated. There's a question mark about some of those individuals who've been names that have been handed over to the president. Already, even before the process started taking place, folks had said, hold on a minute, those who are actually selecting these individuals are partisan already. It seemed as though the broad-based government, with the collapse of the opposition, was going to be a panacea to Kenya's problems. And it should not actually take so long to see some of these things starting to happen, or some semblance of the creation of an agenda. So my question is, if we see the collapse of the opposition joining government, should we then not start to see the fruits of this 10-point agenda that has been planted even start to sprout? IEBC is a fantastic example that you've brought in, because already we are seeing that one would have expected, because we saw these two sides come together, that some of these things would have been a thing of the past. But we don't. And that's why I'm saying the intent is just as important as the outcome.
Maybe the heavier point should be, whose 10-point agenda? When Gen Zs went to the streets, none of those things, the 10-point agenda, was important to them. In fact, they were tribalists. They were saying they don't even care if you appoint an Oromo. We don't even want to know your name. We don't even want to know your tribe. The Gen Zs had made it very clear. What they were looking for is meritocracy. Remove all that 10-point agenda. The IBC guys were saying, in fact, what the Gen Zs are saying, and that's why your generation and the other generations above your generation that do not understand young people. The young people are saying, by the way, we don't even care if the IBC came from one family. As long as they are people who are of good character and they are of good, you can go get 9 sisters and make them, all of them, commissioners, and make one of them to be. We don't even care if they are from the same gender. What young people are saying is that this 10-point agenda is a Raila Ruto agenda. The Gen Z agenda was very different. And they were looking for a Kenya where nobody will be so that you have been appointed for a particular position because you are from the Taita Taveta, or you're from which county, or from which county. The Gen Zs were not interested in that. And that's why people have distanced themselves from the broad-based government, because they're saying everything that this administration is doing is not what took the Gen Zs to the streets. So we need to be told that they go and tear that paper called the 10-point agenda and ask what was the agenda of those people who went to the streets. That agenda is a Ruto agenda, it's a Raila agenda. What was the agenda of the young people who went to the streets and the people who brought this government to come together? Because they came together because of young people who went to the streets, whose agenda is not part of the 10-point agenda. In fact, when they were on the streets, nobody asked the other one, are you from Taveta? Are we doing inclusivity in our demonstrations? In the mortuary, they were not asking, is this a Kikuyu body? I remember when we were going to bury Rex Masai, people only got to know his Kamba at the time of his death. They're saying he's being buried somewhere within Machakos County. But your generation is keen on appointments where they're asking, this one is from which tribe, this is from which generation. That 10-point agenda, the Gen Z will tell you, is not important to them.
Your thoughts?
Okay, my thoughts. Interesting. Again, I would want to invite you to look at the process that has gone to court as a positive process. We must have a country. There are countries where you can't go to court for some of these things. But in Kenya, we have agreed, I think by practice, we seem to have agreed that policy and legislative processes start with, a bipartisan process, and then apart from the bipartisan process, that apart from going to parliament, it must go to the people, public participation, and then apart from public participation, it will then have to go to court. And the court is an accountability process that is important that processes go through. And whatever goes to court, it is not necessarily that it is bad. It is because one part of the country or the nation or certain groups may have disagreed with the process. And the law and the constitution allows them to do that. So I'm only praying that the court makes a quick decision on that. And you see, through court processes, we have then clarified certain processes that legislators enacted law on but were not clear.
Right.
However, in terms of whether the IEBC process was proper, it is important for anybody to appreciate that we had an ADCO process that was co-chaired by Honorable Chungwa and Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka. And in that NADCO process, they actually agreed on a process. And then the question is, does the process they agreed on reflect what has been followed? I have looked at the Amendment Act of 2024, and I have looked at the process that was undertaken. To a great extent, that process was followed. I would want to see what is being raised in court, and then see. I listened to Kalonzo Musyoka on what he was saying about the process. What he was saying about the process does not exist in NADCO, does not exist in the Act.
Our time has come to an end, but
seconds.
we don't even have those 2 seconds, Fanya, unfortunately. And that's why this discourse is important for us to have. There are very many things that we need to continue bringing to the fore. Joshua Odhiambo Nyamori has been our guest this hour. Thank you for being here. Necessary for us to keep talking when we can. Thank you so much. Good morning at a minute past.
The latest news from around the world. 94.4 Spice FM.
This is the News Live.